We're up to Daf Tez Zayin Amud Aleph, and now we're talking about Rebbe and his interpretation of a Yotza B'Shnas HaYovel. The Ove Kochavim Sheyeshno Tachas Yodcha. Let's say you have a Shlita over a guy. It's basically a Sugim Psochim. And even so, if he wasn't Poda the Eved with Kesef Mole, which means the exact value of the years that he hasn't worked yet, then he remains in his Rishus until the Yovel. And we're not going to try to get him away from his master with some sort of a mirma. But again, we're talking now about a guy. This is a whole other set of halachas. So you have shlit of a guy, and if you weren't poda the eved, the guy with kesef mole, then he remains in your rishus until yovel. Oh, ein el biobi kocham sheino tachas yodcha amr. V'chi ma efshal lasos lo. What can he do for the nachri if he's not under the shlit of Yisrael? Eino tachas yodo is ben kach ein derech lahotzi mimeno lotzi mimeno afilu im hoya muta. So the pasuk doesn't have to answer this, because ain't derech lotzio mimeno. Therefore, we derive that ein hakos medaber el biovid kocham sheyeshno tachas yodch. And now we start the sugi of shtar. And in the Mishnah, we learned that Eved iri nikne b'shtar minolan omar ulama kro. The pasuk says that if a man marries an amivriya and then he was Makadish's second sister, and then he was Makadish another wife, is Amakra Imacheres Yikachlo. And there's a hekish in the pasuk. Hikisha Kosuv. The Torah is equating an Amivriya le'acheres. Imacheres Yikachlo. Who's Acheres? She's not an Aku or an Amivriya. She's a full-fledged Israeli, a Bas Yisrael. So we have a hekesh between the Amivriya and a Bas Yisrael, a Miskadeshes. Mo'acheres mekanya b'shtar, af Amivriya mekanya b'shtar. So we know that you can be Kaddish an Isha with a star, and likewise you can be Kona an Amivriya b'shtar. Frekti Gemara Nichelaman di Omar. Shtar Oma Ha'ivriya. What is the text of the shtar? For a kinyan on an Amivriya, Adon Kosvo, the buyer is going to write the shtar. So what does it mean, he nicha? On nicha, l'mandi omar, shtar kinyan, shalom Amivriya, Adon Kosvo. So 1 second, is that similar to Shtar Nesuin, Erison, or not? Adon Koso. The Adon is parallel to the Arusa. Just like she's being Makna herself. No, Fakir. We're holding now that the father writes the Nusach of the Shtar Kiddushin. So what's the equation here now between Amivriya and Isha, Miskadeshes? that in both cases we could derive shtar. And in Kiddushin, shtar is operative, so too it's operative in Amavriya. So when a man is Makadosh and Isha, he writes it in first person, meaning the Makadosh is writing it, and he's the Kona. And so too in Amavriya, the Adon is going to write it in the first person, and that's being Kona. So everything's parallel. Elamandi Omar Av Kosvo. But according to the Mandi Omar, who says that in the case of Omavriya, I'm sorry, in the case of Kiddushin Isha, who writes the shtar? It's the Av. Why? He's the Makna. And he says, Biti Knuya Lecha. How do you equate that with Amavriya? Because in Amavriya, we're saying the Adon writes the shtar, and he's the Kona. And the Av is the Makna. And we're going to the Madhyama that the Av writes the shtar. The Itmar shtar kinyan shalom Avriya mikosvo, Rav Huna Omar Adon kosvo. Rav Chizda Omar Ha'av kosvo. Anichal Rav Huna, who's of the opinion that what? The Adon kosvo, and the Adon is the Kone, is therefore makes sense that the Makadesh writes the shtar because he's the Kone. El Rav Chizda Ma'ikal Meimar. One second. El Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda is Av Kosvo, and the Av is the Makne, and yet in Kiddushin it's the Makadesh, the Kona, who writes the shtar. So there's no equation. So Gemara answers Omar of Acha Bar Yaakov, Omar Kra, in Amavri it says, Lo Teitzei Kitzeis Ha'avodim. And that's a reference to Shein V'Ayin, or Rosh Evarim, that in an Eved Knani, the Eved goes free. In the Amavriya, she does not go free. Avol Niknes, he Kinyan Avodim, Umayni Ushtar. So the Shita of Rav Acha Bar Yaakov is to be medayek that only in the case of Yitzias Shel Amma, as opposed to Yitzias Eved Knani, and through what Kinyan Shtar. So an Eved Ivri is Nikne B'Shtar, and this is derived from Lo Teitzei Kitzeis Havot, meaning not through Shein V'Ayin, but through Shtar. Now later on, we're going to see apparently that there's a hekesh between Eved Knani and Karka. And that's going to teach us that just like Karka is Nikdei B'Kesef Shtar Chazaka, so to Eved Knani is Nikdei B'Kesef Shtar Chazaka. And just like in Karka, it's the Mocher, the Das Machna who writes the Shtar, but also shall Sodai Knulecha, and he gives it over to Lakea. So to an Eved Knani, it's the Adon who's selling his Eved, who writes the Shtar. Avdi Knulecha. Back to Gemara v'Ema avol niknei siki kinyan avodim ayninu chazaka. How do you know when the pasuk of lo teitze kitzeis avodim is coming to exclude kesef that there is a kinyan kesef in Eved Knani? How do you know? Maybe it's referring to chazaka. Amakra visnachaltem. It sounds like the Gemara at this point is dropping the ball on the original drasha of lo teitze kitzeis avodim. Now we're picking up a new drasha, which is not in Sefer Shmos and Parshas Mishpatim, but in Parshas Bahar and Sefer Vayikra. Or maybe it's Parshas Emor. I have to look that up. Anyway, it says there, V'snachaltem osam livnechem achrechem. We were talking about Eved Knani. And now, through Bneichem Achrechem, meaning through Yerusha, the Eved Knani is transferred over to the Yarshim with the death of the Adon. And this pasuk equates Avodim, meaning an Eved Knani, to a Sada. Because the pasuk says by Sada, stay achuzah. It says, V'snachaltem osam l'reshes achuzah. And this is going to teach us that just like a stei achuza, which is karka, is niknei b'chazaka, so to Eved Knani is niknei b'chazaka. So the pasuk says v'snachaltem osam. And what is this coming to teach me? Osam, meaning ovei kolchavim, b'chazaka, through karka, v'lo achem b'chazaka, and not an omevrio and Eved Ivri is niknei b'chazaka. So basically, I think what the Gemara is saying is the following. We're going to derive two halachas from Visnachaltem Osam Levechem Achrechem with regard to Eved Knani. Number one, that with the death of the Adon, the Eved Knani becomes Meshuga to his Yarshim. And number two, that just like a Stei Achuzah is Nikes B'chazaka, so too you can be Kone from an Eved Knani B'chazaka. And then the pasuk says Osam, which means that Osam b'chazak v'lachem b'chazak. In other words, no other Eved other than an Eved Knani can be Kanoi b'chazak. Not an Eved Ivri, not an Omivriya. Fracting more of the Ema, why not assume that Osam is referring to Avodim Knanim? And they are nicknamed b'shtar karka v'lachem, but not Eved Ivri and not Omivriya, b'shtar. So this pasuk is setting up a hekesh between Eved Knani and Karka to teach you that Eved Knani is niknei b'chazak. And I think what's going on here is, on a deeper level, is that the Adon, when he acquires an Eved Knani, he owns the Gufa Eved. So therefore, if he does a Chazok in the Gufa Eved, that's a meaningful Kinyan. However, we're not going to apply this halacha neither to an Eved Ivri nor to an Om Ivriya. And there we're going to require Shtar. Because I think an Eved Ivri or an Om Ivriya is not a Kinyan Aguf. And if it's not a Kinyan Aguf, then although Shtar could be operative and valid, but not Chazok. Fracting Gemara if the Ema Osam B'Shtar V'lo Acher B'Shtar. Maybe the Pasuk Osam has come to be Mamayit other Avodim, that means Jewish Avodim from Shtar. So the Gemara answers Haksiv Lo Teitze Kitseis Avodim, which means that there's a Kinyan Avodim, like Shtar, and the Osam is coming to be made a Kinyan Chazon. So now we have two psukim. One is Marbe a Kinyan Acher, that is Kohen Bel Mevriya, just like in every Knani. And the other pasuk is coming to exclude a certain Kinyan that is valid and operative by every Knani, but not by Om. So the Gemara asks, my chazis, my dami. Let's see what the lashon of the Gemara is. Umara Isa. How do you know to be Mar B'Shtar to exclude Chazaka? Mistar B'Shtar Havilele Rebuye. Shtar should be included because Shtar has a very powerful Kinyan ability. And what is that? Shekei Motzia B'Bas Yisrael. That's called Gerish. I'm going to prove to you that Chazaka is a more far-reaching Kinyan. Shekaim Kona b'Nichsei Ager. Nichsei Ager a Hefker, because he has no Yorshim. And the only way you can be Kona is through Chazaka. And Chazaka works on Hefker. But a Shtar can't be machna anything to Shtar from Hefker. Our answer is no. That's not a good kasha because be'ishus mi lo ashkechan. We don't find a Kinyan Chazaka with regard to ishus. Shtar. So again, we find Shtar is Kona be'ishus, and that's what we said before the get. And as far as Chazaka is concerned, we don't know. Hilkoch mistabel rabo Shtar Kona be'om evriya u'lamayit Chazaka. So we're limited to issues. So the fact that Chazaka works in Nichsei Ager teaches nothing about Avdus, because Avdus is issues. And there's no doubt that this has to do with the fact that he can give his Ivri a Shivcha. Ibai Seima, another reason why we're Mar B'Shtar and we exclude Chazaka. L'hochi ahani, because we go back to the pasuk of Imacheres. And in that pasuk, we saw there was a hekesh between Omavriya and Acheres, which in this context means an Isha Miskadeshes. And we see a gili of this in the pasuk. It says, "Lo teitzik," it says Savod. So we learned from the pasuk Teitzeikitzeis Havadim that an Amavri is nicknamed Bekinyan Avodim. And that's referring to an Amavriya's nicknamed Bishtar Benapa Chazak. And just like an Isha's Miskadeshes is nicknamed Bishtar and not Chazak. However, the main limud here that she's nicknamed Bishtar is not from the word Acheres. And therefore that din is not similar. And Kishem Shehamakadesh Kosev is Ashtar, which as we said many times is very odd. But Ikar Alimudu Mitzeis Havadim, which teaches us that just like an Eved Knani is equated with Karka and he's nicknamed Bishtar, and who's going to write the Shtar? In general, it's the Mocher, the Baal HaSodeh. And Amavriya is Lameda Mikarka, is derived from Karka. She's nicknamed Bishtar, that the Mocher, or in this case, the father, writes out the Shtar, Vahekesh Lacheres, and the Hekesh to Ishus is Nitzrach Kidei Sheneda She'oma Limdo Mikarka Le'inyin Shtar V'lo Le'inyin Chazak. So again, according to Rav Huna, an Amavri is nicknamed Bishtar, and we derive that from Acheres Yikach Lo. According to Rav Chizda, we derive it from Lo Teitze Ketzeis Avod. Frek the Gemara of Rav Huna, Darshans Amavri is nicknamed Bishtar from the Hekesh Acheres. Hi, what is this pasuk? Lo Teitze Ketzeis Avod in my Darishle? What drush is going to use? What is he going to derive from the pasuk Teitze Ketzeis Avadim? Since Rav Huna holds that an Amavri is nicknamed Bishtar, and we derive from Acheres. And where it's the Miboile Sheni Yotzi Barashe Evarim Ke'eved. That Lo Teitze Ketzeis Avadim means that in conscious to an Eved Knani, that if the Adon was chovelim in one of 24 Evarim, then he's Yotzi Lecheres. Here, there's no Yotzi Lecheres. Even though her tooth was knocked out, she's not Yotze B'cherus. Whereas an Eved Knani is Yotze B'cherus. So now we need the pasuk of Lo Teitze Ketzeis Havadim L'Gufo. And therefore, we don't darshan aval niknes he like we did before. And we're not going to darshan a pasuk in a diuk unless we need it legufa. So now, according to that, it's difficult. How is Rav Chizda going to derive that Amavriya is niknes b'shtar from diuk the pasuk? It says aval niknes who, or he, it should say b'ki kinyan avadim. So you want to derive from this pasuk, this miut of Lo Teitze Ketzeis Havadim, legufo. So how can you derive any conclusions about an Amavriya? Rav Chizda answers, Im Kain, if that's what we need the pasuk for, legufo is lichtov kro Lo Teitze Havadim. My Ketzeis Havadim. Shma Mino Tarte. So basically, according to Rav Chizda's logic, there are two diyukim in the pasuk, right? In Ketzeis Havadim, it's a superfluous addition of Ketzeis Havadim. And therefore, we're going to dayak that only with regard to Yitzias Avadim is there a difference between Eved Knani and the other Avadim. Ishma Mino Tartim, we can learn two dinim. Number one, that she's not Yotzis Barashe Evarim, and that she's Niknes B'shtar Kinyan Avadim. So this leads us to V'kona es atzmo b'shonim, that an Eved Ivri is Yotze b'shonim. Here on Tezayin Omen Aleph.